Excellent. Sometimes I forget to do that. Great. So we'll do here in just a second, Bob. I'll pass you the ball as we get going here. So I'll say welcome to our participants real quick. Let's see how we're doing on, we've got 16 people in so far. So welcome as you all are joining in. Very good. Oh, I see a few names in there I recognize. That's great. I see Greg Vickers and Renee and Robin. So hi, everybody. If you want to, you can give us a shout out in chat if you want to say hello, or if you have any questions or comments that come up during the presentation. Also, just so everybody knows, we'll be watching, Heidi, Jeff, and myself will be watching the comments, and we might even be chatting ourselves. One thing I've found that I enjoy is having a little bit more interaction in these conversations, and so we don't want to distract you, Bob, because while you're presenting, you'll see a little pop-up that'll be like comments that we're having in the background. But I will say in the past, it's normally just, yay, we love what he's saying. That was a really good point. Ooh, I'm going to take that one myself. So it's all good. So if you see a comment coming through, it's all good. We're just loving your content. This is definitely, Bob, do you normally, when you're presenting, do you normally have an opportunity to present to like an audience normally in person? Have you ever done very many of these webinars like this?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, during this one, I'm going to stop a couple of different times and ask people to give me a show of hands on different things. So I'd like to see kind of the audience out there and what people's opinions are on some of this stuff.
That's fantastic. Really, really good stuff. We also have the ability, if you wanted to, we can throw together quickly a poll, and Q&A little poll real fast if you wanted to do one of those. But definitely show of hands is a quick, fast way to get people's feedback on here too. So
yeah, we'll keep it lean.
Yay, love it. That's the way we like to roll. We like to keep it. We're a pretty laid back group, if you haven't noticed. It's amazing what you can do when you have a belief or an idea and you don't care who gets the credit, and you know that you're not going to get it exactly right the first time. It's amazing what you can do, because you just launch out and start without this sense of, oh, it's going to look bad on me, or, oh, we're not going to be perfect, or you just start. And then what Heidi and Jeff and I have been playing with is the idea of, let's find ways to get incrementally better. And, it's just really at the heart of Agile. And for me personally, I love this content, and I love being able to share it with people. So we're excited to have you there. We'll go ahead and get started. We want to make sure we get Bob as much time as possible to go over his topic. So people are still joining as we go forward. And we'll probably get Jeff on here in just a second. But I want to quickly review our agenda for today. Between 4 and 4:03, we're going to give people some time to join the call. We know a lot of our people are coming from hard meetings that go right up to the beginning of the hour. And then we're going to have a kickoff, which is what we're doing right now, between 4:03 and 4:05. We'll have the main topic hopefully handed over here in about 1 minute to you, Bob, to hit your main topic. Last 5-ish or so minutes, or maybe even 10 minutes if you end up a little bit earlier, we'll have some Q&A. So we'll pass the control back to us here towards the end, and then we'll have people either in chat or in the Q&A panel submit their questions, and we'll ask those to you, and we'll have some in the background if we don't have any from the audience. And then we'll just do a quick wrap-up talking about what our next event's going to be, which we're very excited about too, and then hopefully end with a couple of minutes to spare, so if people need to grab a drink or something before their next meeting, or if it's the end of their day, they can pack up their desks and head out the door. Good. 3 minutes to spare. So that's our plan for today. We just want to welcome everybody for Coaching Agile Journeys. But basically, we're committed to learning and sharing ideas that interest Agilists, and especially coaches, mainly because we're Agilists and coaches ourselves, and these things interest us. And so as a great opportunity for us to learn and grow, we also like sharing it with you who are able to join us today. So welcome to everybody joining us. A little bit of information about us, coachingagiljourneys.com is our website. You can connect with us there. I've also got our emails listed out here. And briefly on WebEx, you should be able to see a panel over to the right-hand side that should have participants. And if you have any questions or comments during it, there should be buttons that will open up those panels, the Q&A panel or the chat panel. Just throw those in there, and we'll be monitoring it in the background while Bob is doing his presentation. That being said, our topic today is Agile Metrics That Mean Something by Bob Woods. And before we jump in, Heidi, anything I'm leaving out or anything you want to say before we dive in here? As I'll pass the ball over to you, Bob, so that you can get ready while Heidi's answering.
No, looking forward to this. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes, we're very happy to have you here, Bob. And I see that Jeff has joined. He's still got getting his audio linked up, but we'll get him for the Q&A time. So, Bob, we'll go quiet here and let you have the stage. And if you have any questions, we're here if you need us. So, again, thank you for presenting, everybody. It's Bob Woods.
All right. Appreciate that. Just a quick question. Can you guys see what I'm presenting here? You got this, Isaac?
Yep, it's coming through.
Okay, excellent.
Coming through clear. Yep.
All right, good. Just want to make sure. So just a couple of housekeeping notes. And guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but phones have been muted. We talked about the Q&A afterwards, and I do want to make sure to leave time at the end for questions. And this is the slide that I absolutely hate the most, so I'm going to breeze over it real quick. Those who don't know me, I'm currently Director of National Agile Practice for Matrix, but I do different webinars and speaking opportunities as well. From an agenda perspective, these are the things that we're going to wind up talking about. First of which are metrics necessary in an Agile environment. When should we even bother to measure? What do we measure? Who do we share it with? What kind of things do we need to avoid from a metrics perspective? And then obviously we're going to give time for questions at the end. So just to set expectations a little bit, if these are not topics interesting to you, then perhaps this isn't the right webinar for you. So let's jump right into it. When we typically engage an organization or we find that they want to become more agile with what they do, they want to increase their speed to market, and they want to see innovation faster and get more collaborative with what they do, everybody gets very, very excited with the ideas and the concepts of doing this. And we have all these different concepts that we want to put in place, and being able to get business and IT alignment and have self-organizing, self-empowered teams. And all of these things are really, really great. And they're what puts excitement behind being in an Agile environment, being a part of an Agile organization, and really being Agile is what we do. And part of what happens is as we engage in these things, we have these different aspects of starting to work this way that we're a part of. We go through perhaps a discovery or assessment. We get training on things that we're doing, and we get tools involved. We get coaching involved. We attend seminars and workshops, and we get coaching on what we're doing, and we get the stuff up on the walls, and we invest in tons of sticky notes. And at the end of the day, after we put all these things in place and we attend the conferences and we get into the meetups, we even go so far as to have refresher training down the road on what it is that we're doing, because perhaps we've fallen off a little bit. But after all of these things get done, we wind up sitting back, many organizations, and saying, so are we actually better from having done this? And this is a problem that a lot of organizations can find themselves in, because what they'll do is they will just kick right off with the concept of being involved in an Agile environment, and they'll say, we're getting away from the waterfall stuff, we're getting away from the waterfall metrics and being measured that way, and we're going to jump right into Agile, and we get involved with all these different ceremonies, and we get involved with all these different aspects of the education and the coaching, but at the end of the day, we don't actually even know if we're better for having done it. And we know we're delivering some things. Hopefully we're delivering some things. We know we see a bunch of people doing stand-ups perhaps and being involved in ceremonies and stuff up on the walls, but we don't actually know if we're getting better from having done this. And unfortunately, we see some organizations that wind up having to take a step backwards because they've gone through making all the investments around these things, and they've convinced somebody to put the money into it, But at a high level, we wind up seeing executives that are looking at the investment they made, and besides, yes, we have seen some working software, what else is my return on investment? From an organizational perspective, are we seeing that we're better? Now, there's one argument to be had that, well, if we're delivering value to the customer, does it matter what's happening underneath? Well, an executive that is truly concerned about the culture of their organization, concerned about the professional improvement of the people that work for them, they're concerned about the day-to-day lives of the people who are involved, yeah, they're going to be interested in knowing, are we actually improving on what we're doing? Are we seeing a professional improvement? Are we seeing improvements in quality? Are we sure we're actually delivering business value on what we're doing, or are we just continually delivering software and we don't know if it's of the highest value? So a lot of these are questions that we have to have answered, and simply walking through ceremonies, getting training and coaching, and doing assessments and things like that are not going to tell us that. So we have to have some answers to different questions. Now, this is where I like to make sure to put a disclaimer out there. There is not one single metric that's used at every organization the same way. All right, every person, every team, every company, you are unique. And so measurements should be considered likewise. So as we go walking through this information, I want you to make sure to take it within the right context. Because what I don't want to have happen is somebody to call me 3 months from now and say, well, Bob, you said that we should be using such and such metrics at our organization, and it just doesn't fit us. So you see, Agile's not going to work here. That's not how it works. In your context, with your teams, the people who you're talking about. I literally had this conversation with a CIO this morning about the CEO that he wants to get metrics to. And my question was, what is his personality? What is he looking for? What type of information is useful to him? Because you can throw a lot of information at him, but it might not mean anything to him and his style. And so I want to make sure to keep that in mind as we go forward. So an important thing to keep in mind when we talk about metrics is that the more information that you tend to give someone, the less likely they are to look at it. And perhaps this little diagram looks extremely familiar to you, because at the end of the day, if we are just absolutely hammering people with information and diagrams and charts and so forth, we'll probably lose them. And we have to make sure that we're zeroing in on our target. It's the hunting concept, aim small, miss small, right? And we think of that in terms of the products that we deliver, wanting to make sure that we're zeroing in on what people are actually looking for. It's no different with regards to getting people information with regards to their metrics. We want to make sure that it's not so overwhelming that we're creating confusion more than we are creating great information that we can ask the right questions from. But there's another side of this, is that sometimes we can give far too little information. And we say, well, we think we're just about right here, but then we can't make any good decisions off of that. It doesn't give us anything that we can ask questions from and get good information from to find out if we're improving going forward. And so a lot of this comes down to value, which is basically what an Agile environment is designed around. It's all about value. Whether it's the products we deliver or the metrics that we give somebody or the ceremonies we're involved in or the meetings that we're in, it's all about making sure that it has value in what we're doing. And we see the value, we recognize it. And if there's no value in doing it, and if we're not getting good information, then we need to stop doing it. So from an Agile perspective, you have those that are on one side of the fence that say, you know what, we're Agile, and the only thing that matters is that we're delivering working software. All other metrics are a complete waste of time. And there could be an argument for that. And then you have other folks who say, well, you know what, we're a company, we're an organization, we've got a budget, we've got customers that we're trying to deliver for, and we need to know whether or not this investment into this massive change that we're undergoing is actually worth it at the end of the day. And so you can see a side from both areas. Now, on the one hand, for the folks that say, look, we're Agile and the only thing that matters is working software, that's true. That's as far as the principles go, the primary measure of progress is working software. I would argue that the primary measure of progress is value delivered, because we can deliver working software all the time, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the most valuable thing. We have to make sure it's the most valuable thing. But on the other hand, we have a budget, and we need to know whether or not our investment into Agile is worth it, and we're seeing improvement in what we're doing, and that's absolutely true. And in order to do that, we have to be able to measure it. I worked with one CIO in an organization who was infamous for saying, if you can't measure something, then measure it. And if you still can't measure it, then try measuring it again. And basically what he's looking for is we got to have some sort of way of getting information from what we're trying to deliver here. And so in an Agile environment, we've got to be able to find that balance. We have to be able to find the balance between being able to deliver working software and be able to deliver the right things without having an overwhelming burden on the metrics and being measured in different things, but at the same time know how we're improving going forward. Now, I have expanded my screen out so that this is what I'm seeing. And Jeff is telling me that I have a crosshatch pattern on the viewer slide. So I'm going to try to improve that. So Jeff, I need you to let me know if I've got any sort of improvement on this.
Yeah, that does look better.
Okay, thank you, Isaac. All right, so it's true we want to stick with what Agile says, right? Primary measure of progress is working software. Value delivered is something that I would say. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, but at the same time, measure what is measurable and make measurable what is not so. And so in the spirit of doing so, the reality is that being in an Agile environment is much more about the continual reflection, that feedback, improvement, than it really is about working software. Because lots of companies out there create working software, but it doesn't mean that they work in an Agile environment. We do what's valuable, and we continually improve based on that continual reflection, based on the feedback, so that we can adapt and be more flexible based on what customers' needs are, and then as we're going forward, continue to find ways to improve on what we're doing. That being said, you got to know where you were previously, where are you at right now, and then decide where you want to go. And then ask the right questions in order to be able to get yourself there. And so we have to start looking at that. And this is where a lot of organizations fail when it comes to implementing Agile methods, is that we never really took a strong look at where we were before and then where we were starting out from, so that we could know if we were improving going forward. And then as they're going, they will come across roadblocks or bumps in the road in their Agile journey. And if it's really rough, they might revert back without having recognized and seen any sort of improvement they've made to that point, which is really a foundation for them to be able to continue through the rough spots. But they never took the time from the beginning to reflect back so that they could measure going forward that they were getting better, even though they were experiencing difficult times. And so it's interesting that we had this inherent desire to not be measured. And I work with developers and others all the time that they say, no, I don't want to be measured. Again, I had that conversation this morning, a VP of development that I was talking to as well. And there are certain folks that I just don't want to be measured. I don't want anybody to look at me and judge me and measure me, and I just want to be able to focus on getting my work done. But we will inherently measure tremendous other things in our lives. And when we think about those concepts and how we want measurements in other areas, it just happens to be this one area where we don't. But we measure these other things, such as our heart rate, our speed, how many steps we've gotten, all those different things, because what are we trying to do? We're trying to keep track from a control perspective. Yes, when we look at our speed, hey, there are controls in place that we have to make sure that we're meeting, otherwise there are consequences, right? but also when you think about your heart rate, right? There's a health concern in this. And so when we think about measuring from the things that we do internal to an organization, there's a health aspect that's associated to that we're trying to improve our health going forward, or trying to improve in how we actually operate as an organization, just like how we operate as a physical being. And so that need to measure in an Agile environment is really the only way whether we're going to know whether we're improving. So, and that continual improvement is at the heart of any organization that wants to say that it is Agile going forward, right? And that's everybody's goal. We want to say we're an Agile organization, right? Whatever that nirvana state is, well, if we want to be able to say that, then we have to say we're continually improving. And in order to do that, you've got to be able to measure yourself to find out if you're actually continually improving. It can't just be a sniff test. It's at the end of the day, not enough. And a sniff test can actually absolutely be a part of it. You know, does it feel like we're actually better? And there's nothing wrong with saying, yeah, we feel like we're better. But I talk to teams all the time, and I ask them, you know, how do you think you guys are doing with regards to, you know, using Agile methods? They say, we're doing great. We're doing fantastic. It feels like we're doing great. But then I'll spend a week with them, and they're struggling. They're absolutely struggling. And so it's great that they feel good about what they're doing, but if they could actually take a step back and take a look at some actual information that will help them to improve in other areas, they could see some real success in what they're doing. And so we need to know when is it appropriate to measure. When should we start doing these things, and what do we need to measure? And this is a really important one. Who do we share the information with? Because that also is a critical aspect of an Agile organization and how they go about providing that information, providing the transparency. The transparency aspect of being in an Agile environment is critical. And that's different than simply visibility, right? Because I can give people visibility all day long, but it doesn't mean that I'm being transparent. When I be transparent, I'm showing the ugly as well. And so it's not easy to share that information for a lot of people, especially when we're just starting out. And if you have a culture right now where you are able to share, you know, failures and things that are going on, and it's embraced the right way, congratulations, because that's really, really great. But many organizations are not there. And so there's a lot of trepidation around who do I share this information with, because how's that going to reflect on me, on my team, on my department? And so getting into that culture of trust is a hard thing to get to, but you have to start somewhere. So there's some great characteristics that come with gathering Agile metrics. And I want to go over what some of those things are with you guys. And this is some relatively common information around metrics in the Agile community. But to start off, great metrics in an Agile environment, and these are things that you want to keep in mind no matter what it is that you decide to choose that you want to measure. First of all, it should facilitate conversation. That's a very important aspect of this. It shouldn't just be some number. It shouldn't just be something that we look at and say, okay, great. There should be questions that come out of it. There should be opportunity that comes out of it. There should be reflection of some sort. There should be debate. And if there isn't, then we have to ask ourselves whether or not this information is good to have. If it's just something to look at, then it's not good information because it's not providing us value. The information itself should provide great conversation that leads to certain results, leads to certain outcomes. It should be simple to gather. And some of the metrics that are out there are actually not that simple to get. We have to go through various processes, go through different tools, sorting out spreadsheets in order to get to a point where we have a certain metric that we feel that we can use. If it takes that much effort, then we have to question whether the value is there in doing it. So the metric itself should be simple to gather. The other thing that we have to think about is that we want to be measuring outcomes, not simply output of something. And so we're looking for results. We're looking for things that are actionable. We're not just purely looking for numbers. And when you think about, from a numbers perspective, how many of this and how many of that, that probably has to be one of the easiest gaming things to have as a metric. Do you remember the old days from a waterfall perspective where we would measure how many lines of code a developer could create, right? I mean, how we look back at that when we kind of chuckle, and perhaps there's some organizations, some of you folks out there now who you still measure that way. How many lines of code can we create? But if there aren't any developers or architects on this call, and if you were getting measured by lines of code right now, you can imagine the kinds of code that we would actually create, right? It would just be enormous and cumbersome, and we don't write things out. We try to make it as lean and efficient as possible now. And so even from a defect perspective, there are a lot of organizations that still count how many defects a QA person can find, and then how few defects a development person can create in an Agile environment, which inherently creates horrible dynamics on a team. And so that's the outcome, right? And so from an output perspective, it becomes very, very gameable and creates poor dynamics. And from an outcome perspective, it gets us something actionable. It should also reinforce Agile principles. Now, you think about the 12 principles that we talk to so many organizations about, so many people about. We want to be able to apply these things and how we work day to day. It should reinforce that. If we're not able to go back to those principles and highlight working in an Agile way, having that Agile mindset, but it forces us to start thinking in a different way, because some of these metrics, if they're being used in a waterfall way, can start to feel very command and control. And the next thing you know, we're not reinforcing Agile principles, but we do have measurement. And so we have to make sure that we're still reinforcing, we're having a foundation around what the Agile principles are. We want to watch for trends. So if we see certain areas that are trending up and we want it to trend up, that's great. Trending down, that could be a good thing too. But ultimately, as we're watching for those trends, that's something that we can look at, ask questions, why is it going in this or that direction, or is it moving nowhere at all, and then say, what do we need to do? So here we are asking questions to move the needle. What do we need to do to move the needle one direction or the other on the information that we're seeing? We should be able to promote feedback loops on what we do, which means always asking from, maybe it's if we're measuring the team's perspective. If the clients are looking for something from us, those feedback loops that are there. Is it within our portfolio that we're seeing feedback loops on what we're doing? It should promote those feedback loops. Are we trying different things based on that information? Is it coming back around from what we're learning, and then are we adapting it going forward and going back into the try perspective? It's that feedback loop should be driven, not driven necessarily, but it should be supported by the information that we're receiving through our metrics. And then from a quality perspective, encouraging good enough quality in what we do. That's an important aspect of it as well, because we can let perfection get in the way of progress. And that's a huge problem when it comes to being in an Agile environment and getting things done quicker. We don't want to be in a situation where we are so focused on perfection that we're not allowed to progress going forward. And so here is another warning disclaimer. In order to be able to apply metrics, you have to have a stable environment. And so when it comes to teams, let's say, we're looking for ways to help see if our teams are improving on what they're doing. If you have team members who are constantly being swapped around all over the place, so you got 35% of an FTE there, 25% over here, 10 over there, then it becomes really hard to get good metrics, because essentially you're trying to measure a moving target. And it's garbage in, garbage out. I mean, this is a core aspect of technology and IT. You're going to be getting bad metrics in because people are spread all over the place. And that's really indicative of a larger problem that we wind up having to tackle. We're working with one organization right now who that is one of their biggest problems. It's not necessarily they don't have enough people, it's just they've got so used to culturally spreading people all over the different places, and that the multitasking is a great thing. You know, everybody should be multitasking on different things. In the meetings, it's the same way, and that's what their culture is. But then they struggle to see any good throughput with how they deliver on their products. And so the same thing is true when it comes to measuring in these environments. If we don't have some sort of stability, then it becomes very difficult to create cohesion, and with that cohesion, we get good information that we can go by. And so one of the things I actually do want to do right now is for those people who, for those of you on the phone right now, I want to just take a quick show of hands. So with the little hand icon, what I want you guys to do is just kind of show me, give me a raise of hands if you're in one of those environments where people are spread around all over the place. And I'm not going to be able to see it, so Isaac, I'll have you just take a look at that. But give me a show of hands if you have people who are spread across multiple teams in multiple different areas, and that's one of the key problems that you have with regards to metrics. Just do a quick show of hands and a raise of hands.
I'm counting a little over, oh, sorry, I was going to say, I'm counting
go ahead,
over a third, closer to a half, so I'm between a third and a half of hands that are going up, and actually going up a little more. Yep, I'd call it a good half by now.
Yeah, and this is a very common thing that we run across, that we want to be able to find ways to see if we're continually improving, and so we go to look down and say, okay, let's try to measure what we're doing, but we have people spread across so many areas and working on different things that it becomes so hard to find good measurements. And so this is why this disclaimer is in there, is we have to be able to create some sort of stability. And if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, well, that's just never going to happen in my organization, should I never measure? Go back to, you know, the Toyota 5 whys just as an example. Why are we spread like that across? Is that just our culture? How can we go about creating change there? You know, why do we have, why can't we get to a point where people are allowed to focus? And just keep going through until you get to the crux of the actual problem. And don't try to create Band-Aids in your environment for real issues. I don't know if you've seen a commercial that's come out recently with the woman who gets in her car and she goes to turn the key and the check engine light comes on. And she just takes a sticker and puts it over the check engine light. And that's what we'll see organizations do, is they'll say, well, we're just spread across a whole lot of, you know, we have people spread all over the place, we're just going to have to deal with it. No, deal with the issue, right? Deal with the actual issue at hand, and let's overcome some of these large problems so that we can get to the improvement that we want to get to. But sometimes we'll put a sticker over it and hope that somehow Agile is going to save the day, even though we have all these major issues internally. Agile is going to create exposure to the issues, and it's going to become glaring. And this is one of the ways that it does it, through how we go about measuring ourselves. So let's get right into the when to measure. Don't wait until we're asking ourselves if this is helping to start measure, all right? So start doing it now. Start measuring immediately so that you have some sort of frame of reference. We don't want to wait till further down the road and say, well, we'll consider doing that as we mature a little bit. You won't know if you're maturing if you don't start measuring now. So you've got to start finding some way to put into place some measurements. But start small. This is a lean concept, right? Start with lean in mind with regards to, don't overwhelm yourself, don't overwhelm the concept. Iteratively dive deeper as you go, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but you want to start small. And so that could be something as specific as, you know, if you're doing Scrum, let's just focus for the moment on getting the teams to be able to do estimation and just getting them to get their velocity, right? And we'll just start with that. And that'll help us to get to a certain point where we have a cadence of knowing what team capability is, if that's what you're doing, right? If you're using Kanban, that's a very Kanban concept, is start with what you know now, right? So start looking at where you are, visualize where you are right now, and understand what your lead times are, understand what your cycle times are. Start watching for that, and then continue to iteratively, in a small way, see how you're improving going forward. One of the big mistakes that we'll see organizations make as they do this is that And I know there are organizations out there that have these great colorful radar charts around how you can measure yourself in all these fancy different ways, and things having to do with the team and the portfolio and product ownership and the business and all these different aspects, and they'll jump into it head first trying to measure all of them. And that can become so overwhelming. And if that's what you've done and that works for you, then great, more power to you. What we see more often than not is that when we jump in head first like that, we go back to that slide I showed you in the beginning with all the information all over the place, and we're not actually sure what it all means. And if our radar chart is all centered right down towards the middle as we begin and we just want to see it grow out, that's okay, that's fine. But as far as what's valuable to you and what you want to move the needle on, start small. Because it's just like from a retrospective standpoint. If you come out of a retrospective, you want to just take one or two small things that we can move the needle on, not try to change the world on continual improvement. The same thing happens right here. If we're just starting off in our Agile journey, then we don't want to try to measure the world. Let's just take a couple of things that we feel is important to get underneath us foundationally and get good at that. Because as we do that, especially iteratively, and then we watch for how we're doing it, we're going to change how we look at that information. We're going to fundamentally look back and say, you know what, remember how we used to measure ourselves on such and such? That's so funny because we don't do that anymore. You're going to have that happen going forward, right? So just start small and then increase those measurements as it makes sense to do so, right? And that's important as it makes sense to do so. Don't just do it because we have a PMO and they need to come back with information to show that they have job justification. That's not a good reason for doing this. As it makes sense to do so means that we've gotten good at a couple of pieces of this. Let's add in a couple more that we deem valuable. And then, again, keep in mind, the more you give people, the less likely are they to look at it. And so if we try to blitz with tons of information, guess what? A lot of you could probably feel this way, but we're only going to really look at 2 or 3 of them. And so if we're trying to consume it all at once, and we're trying to move the needle on everything all at once, then our chances for success overall actually wind up going down. So keep it simple, all right? Especially when it comes to what are we going to measure. Keep it simple. We talked about in the beginning, we talked about velocity, right? So from a team perspective, from a Scrum perspective, I know this can be kind of a religious war in the Agile community on whether or not velocity is a good thing. We should do no estimates. You know, I realize that there's different aspects of this, but what we find from an organization just getting started, they need to learn, what they are capable of doing, and over time, at the end of the day, velocity does impact all sorts of different things. I had a conversation just recently with an executive that wanted to get greater predictability, right? I need to be able to make decisions going forward from a portfolio perspective on what we can do. But the problem is, I don't know what the teams are capable of. I know they're coming to me saying they need more resources, but they can't show me they need more resources. They're just coming to me saying, hey, we need more people. And that's a gut feeling for them, but they can't quantify that. This is one of the areas where velocity is useful in saying, look, the team's capable of X, you want Y, what do we do about it, right? And so we can make portfolio decisions at that level. We can understand what sustainable pace is for the teams. It's just a quick way, it's a quick win of being able to say, and it doesn't take that long, of finding out what people are actually capable of doing going forward. Not everybody is a proponent of velocity. I get that. It's just one of those areas where it's a quick win, and it's something you can make decisions off of, and you can use the information, right? So if you have, your burn down charts just as a perspective, I am a proponent of story points on burn down charts as opposed to hours and tasks. I have seen organizations that they want to burn hours, and if people want to do that and they see value in doing it, more power to them. They say that they can do great capacity planning that way. That's fine. My opinion is when you burn hours, you can have the best looking burn down chart in the world, but it doesn't mean you delivered anything. And you can have a burn down chart or burn up chart showing tasks, and we are burning tasks all day long, and it goes up and down, and it goes right along that line just perfectly, but it doesn't mean that we've actually delivered anything by the end of the sprint. So my opinion is if we're burning points, then that means something actually got accepted. It was the business said, yes, we like this, we're going to accept it going forward, and we created some sort of value. From a capacity planning perspective and seeing if people are overburdened and things like that, if that's valuable to you and your organization, then by all means go ahead and do it. Again, that goes back to every organization is different. Just make sure you see the value in doing it. It's not too hard to get, and it supports working in an agile way, and that we don't become very project manager-y as we're doing this, okay? And I think you know what I mean by that from a command and control perspective. So going to the value delivered. This is an important one that I think is good to start looking at in the beginning, because as the team starts working through, regardless of what framework you're working in, we're trying to get value delivered faster, right? So when we think about value to our organization, this goes to whether or not we have done a good job looking at business value. If you want to read a good book on defining business value, Joanne Rothman wrote a book on this called Diving for Hidden Treasures. That is a great book on trying to mine business value within your organization. I highly recommend that one. And there are others that are out there, but from an organizational perspective, you got to know what value is to you and your company, and then see how the team progresses in delivering that value and being able to shorten the time frame and how they do that. So from the beginning, try to look at value delivered. And then from a quality perspective, are we creating good quality products? Are people happy with it? And one of the things that this gives us is we're not necessarily looking for this information to be able to pound down people and say you got to pay closer attention. Make sure you're using this information for the right reasons. For the right reasons is things like professional improvement. So we have a lack of knowledge in Java development within our area or testing for those things. Because if we do, then we can send somebody to some classes or get some coaching in it or whatever that case is, but those are actionable things that we're measuring up and we're not measuring down. We're not using it to beat people over the head with their year reviews and say, you know, you didn't find X number of defects that came out of it. And that just goes into the numbers thing, right? We're not looking for purely output, we're looking for outcome. What the outcome is that we can improve the skill sets of the people that we're working with, right? And so make sure we're using the information correctly. Do we have a poor architecture with what we're doing? Are we creating technical debt, help desk tickets for long term? These are all things that we can create action out of with this. And then productivity, again, going back to the story points and value delivered in what we're doing. Create visibility into overall team productivity. And this is something that resonates with your functional managers. Perhaps you're in a situation where you have a layer of middle management that says, look, I need to know how these teams are working and how they're improving on what they're doing. And so, you know, how do I see that? Well, productivity is a good way to do it. Are they delivering great business value? Story points delivered, business value, how that's quantified. You can pull those things together and say, hey, look, team's doing great, or maybe there's opportunity there. How can we help the team out, okay? So not a little far down the road, our cycle time. Are we actually faster than we used to be? And so from something that came from an idea, and then how long does it take before it actually gets into the hands of the people that actually wanted it, right? And so as I go through a little further down the road metrics, keep in mind that these are just some concepts for you guys to use. You can use them anytime you want as it makes sense to. But from a cycle time, we usually need a little bit of time to get our feet underneath us to see our cycle times improve. So that's why I say this is something that you'll probably look for a little further down the road, as long as you spent some time up front understanding how long it took you to begin with. This is from a quality perspective. Escape defects is one of those things that I will create a side note for when it comes to numbers. But again, you got to use the information for the right reasons. Right? We're doing a good job of testing from a development perspective, where we got automation in place and we've got good quality folks and then we've got some dedication there, and yet we still had a couple of things let loose out into the wild. Those are good things to know because it helps you to improve how you tackle it going forward. Again, make sure you're using the information for continual improvement, not to measure down on people. Customer satisfaction. Are people happy with the things we're creating? And so this is why I say not too far down the road from a measurement perspective, because we have to start getting things into their hands to find out whether or not they're happy with it. So a little ways down the road, we got to start looking at, okay, are people happy with what we're doing? And of course, you want to get feedback as soon as possible on those things, but before people can give you feedback, they want to be able to see that you're creating things for them. That usually takes a little bit of time, right? So it's not just customer satisfaction in terms of engagement and collaboration on what needs are, but it's also in the fact that they've started using an actual product that they asked for, they've had it for a little while, and they're happy with the way it's been working, okay? And then feature flexibility. How often, this is where we start to bake agility into actually how we go about adapting to customer needs. And this is a measurable item. How often do we deviate from the expected to respond to the unexpected? So we have had a focus in, let's say if we're doing Scrum, or even from a Kanban perspective, we've had our stories go through different criteria so we can make sure that we start working on them. And as we're working through, somebody comes in and says, actually, customer just came back and said we need X, Y, and Z. How often do we push back? How often do we course correct immediately? How fast do we do it? And you can look at, from a backlog perspective, what did we expect to get done? What was the adaptation? What was the ultimate outcome? And then you can see what your agility was. What was our flexibility in response to customer need? Because that, too, is supporting the Agile principles, right? And so you can actually, that's one of those things that you can measure. It can be a great response to customer need, or conversely, it could be an indicator of too much context switching, and perhaps we need to take a step back and find out if the customer is unclear on what their needs are as well, and there's more collaboration that needs to take place. But those are actionable things. And so from an eventually perspective, our process improvement, we want to know that we're actually getting better in what we do. And so we want to make sure we're having retrospectives and so forth, so we can show we improved over time. But are we actually better off for having done this as an entire organization? Okay, and so from a process perspective, are we improving in our processes? Are we tweaking our processes going forward? Are we just sticking to the status quo and not necessarily looking at our processes and saying, yeah, we had to change things here, change things there because we know it makes us better. Keep track of what some of those things are. How have you actually improved in your processes? Create visibility to what those are. Those are successes because you're not just sticking to the, well, this is just the way we've always done it. You're actually looking for opportunity there. Your portfolio agility. All right, now we're talking about getting it a little bit higher up. Are we adapting to what we're seeing with regards to value delivered from the teams? All right, does the run rate of the team outweigh remaining value to be delivered, and are we making good decisions around that? Or are we simply saying we're funding a set of projects in the beginning of the year, we're going to hammer through to their absolute completion, and then reap the benefits at the end of the year? Right? Are we actually seeing flexibility within our portfolio process? Are we baking agility into that so we can course correct when we see deviations from a market perspective, from a customer perspective? We've got to be able to display that kind of agility at a higher level so that the teams know they're working on the right things as well. Because if we don't, then we're doing a disservice to our customers. No matter how adaptable the teams are, we're working on the wrong things. Quality automation is one of the ones that I hear coming up a lot with the architecture teams, with the quality teams, that they like to take a look at as we go about creating a product, how much of this has actually been automated. And that helps them to know that they're seeing efficiencies in how they go about their testing processes that they would not have had if they had done it manually. And there are ways that you can actually create quantifiable information for improvement on that, such as, you know, if your average QA person salaried at such and such had to spend this amount of time doing manual testing on something, we've decreased that amount to such and such through an automation process that now takes them a shorter amount of time, and then they can dedicate more towards value delivered items, right? And so you can actually put some great information around that from an automation perspective to say that we are improving the bottom line of the organization through great quality automation practices. And then technical debt. So as we go about creating the product that we're creating, and this is a tremendously overlooked aspect of measurement, are we taking a look at the debt that we have? Are we taking the time to take a step back, find out what we're accumulating for technical debt, and from a business value perspective versus effort, are we addressing that technical debt? What are the things that we just need to toss away? What is of high value but low effort that we can be doing right now? What is of high value and high effort that we need to plan for, right? Are there things that are low value and low effort that we ultimately could pull in if we have some extra time, or are there low value, high effort things that we might have been thinking about doing that we should take out of the equation altogether because there's no value in doing it? If we're not wrapping our brain around our technical debt and then actually showing that perhaps on a cycle-by-cycle or sprint-by-sprint basis that we're tackling these things, I mean, at the end of the day, it takes more money and time and effort to remediate a product than it does to keep it up to date going forward and to tackle that debt. And so it can become like financial debt, and it just gets worse the longer you hold it off. So we want to make sure that we're taking the time to address that and then ultimately measure the amount that we're addressing so that we can show we're creating a high quality product. Now here's another disclaimer. With great information comes great responsibility. So you can use this information for good or evil, right? So this goes into who we share this information with. For the team, right, things that we want to keep at the team level, addressing our technical debt, our burn down charts, you know, things like that. We want to make sure that we find ways to measurements that allow them to be empowered, accountable, and constructive self-reflection without fear of retribution. So as we're looking at these metrics, who we share it with, there are certain things that just stay at the team. Because if I share a burn down chart with a top level executive and that line's going straight across and then shoots right down on last Friday of a sprint or something along those lines, he's going to see it and say something like, well, the team wasn't getting anything done for 2 weeks and then scrambled at the end. That's not sustainable. Or the story was the product owner was on vacation for 2 weeks, came back at the end and signed off on everything, right? He's not going to know. So we need to be able to make sure we're sharing that information with the right people. Those are some things that you want to keep at the team level. Functional leadership is probably going to be interested in our percentage of code coverage from an automation standpoint, value that we're delivering, completed versus committed items. How's the teams doing from a morale perspective? You Scrum Masters out there, do you know what your team morale is? Are you measuring that? Are you seeing it go up or down? Are there cycles that they go through? Those are things that you can actually measure. And functional leadership is curious and interested in those things because a lot of times they just want to see how they can help out. At a portfolio leadership level, team velocity really helps out a lot because it helps to see how my portfolio is impacted, and if I can bake in agility into that. Value delivered versus remaining work, seeing what our release burn-ups are and how close we are based on team velocity. Time to value in a Kanban environment, are we shortening that time? Okay, so that we can see value quicker. Those are all great ways that we can be able to get portfolio leadership information. And from an executive perspective, time to value is a good one as well. Customer satisfaction, they're very concerned with. If a lot of great leadership out there wants to know how the morale of their teams is, their portfolio adaptability, financial reallocation. Wrap your brain around this one for a second. So as we're going through the portfolio agility process and we're reallocating funds in different areas, how often do we do it? What is the impact? And is it improving us because we are reallocating teams and funds towards the next most valuable thing instead of finishing off one thing just at the end? So are we able to see value in things and better utilize the funds that we've agreed to going forward? Those are great areas to be able to give executive leadership information. So this is my final disclaimer. There are some things you should consider avoiding altogether. Avoid measurements that have no action items, purely numbers-based. Watch for gamificationism. Okay, as you're going through, if it's something that's easily gamed, don't touch it, right? Because ultimately it's not going to give you good information. You want measurements that create work but not, anything that creates work but not conversation. All right, if all we're doing is creating more work, but we're not having good conversation around it, then it's not useful to us. And if it's too complex to gather or anything that, again, measures down, we don't want to come back at people with metrics and then it be something that it's held over their head, everybody ultimately regrets having put it in place, and they're constantly, we create a culture of people who are looking for ways to gain the metrics that we put in. So there are a lot of different options to have in an Agile environment, but the important aspects of this, guys, is that you want to get the input of folks, get collaborative about it. There's a concept that we promote called CLEAR, and that applies to every aspect of an organization that's completely framework agnostic, and that means that everything we do is collaborative, lean, evolving, adaptable, and reportable. And that goes from how we create a task to a user story right up to enterprise portfolio management. And that means if we have team input, if we have organizational input on how we go about measuring, that means people will be accountable for it and they'll want to be involved in it. If it's just something we're throwing at them, then we'll get malicious obedience. And that comes into the empowerment. All right, we want to promote empowerment. We want to promote continual improvement around what people do. We want to promote simplicity, guys. Keep it simple with regards to how you go about your measurement. Make sure it's always focused around our customers and our business value with what we do, and then support people in what they're doing. Don't use it for measuring down, use it for measuring up, all right? That's it. I tried to summarize things with just a few minutes left. Are there any questions that came up that we could go ahead and hit?
Yeah, I think there's one, by the way, thank you, that was excellent. I think there's one good one that's at the top that I think is a powerful one. As you're going through these metrics, one thing that happens is that the business starts to look for tracking hours and equating them to velocity/story points. And sometimes that can lead to inflated estimates by the developers or some type of a formula for calculating the time this work is going to take. How do you recommend avoiding that hours versus velocity/story points hijacking, if you will, of story points?
The good case that I have heard for tracking hours is capitalization, right? We want to say that we're actually creating these things and we're capitalizing it. Anything outside of that feels very project manager-y to me, and I'm trying to grab from, let's say you're trying to do it from a capacity perspective. I want to understand hours from a capacity perspective. There have been studies that have shown that as individuals, when we go to estimate time, how long something's going to take us, on average, we're off by 400%. And you guys have probably been in situations where you go to ask, let's say, a developer for how long is this going to take, and they cringe, they shrink back into their seat, and they're like, I don't even want to talk about this. And it's because we've been asking them their whole career, how long is it going to take, and more often than not, they've given you a time frame, and they've been wrong for some reason. And then we come back to them and say, hey, why were you wrong? Why couldn't you be more accurate? And so because of that, we force them to work nights and weekends to hit that 8 hours that they said it was going to take, and we create this non-sustainable pace, and then good people quit. And we don't want to be in that kind of environment. And so I'm not a big promoter of the tracking hours to gain velocity type stuff. I would prefer to simply stick with story points and say, all right, look, I'm just going to tell you what the either effort level or size of this thing is going to be. And if we're doing sprinting, you'll get it within the sprint or at the end of the sprint, right? I mean, we're still creating a time box, if you will, but I'm eliminating the ugliness around the project management side of this of, hey, you said that a 3 on the Fibonacci scale was actually equating to a day and a half, and it's been a day and a half, and I haven't seen that story move, and so what's going on with that? We're creating this horrible team dynamic, right? And so we want to try to eliminate that to create a good environment, but still get the kind of information we need. If my team's velocity is 50 and an executive wants 75 out of them, but we've shown over time sustainably that we have tried to increase the velocity, we've hit their sweet spot, then we can give them quantifiable information with story points that show, hey, team's capable of X. But usually we implement the concept of hours to try to fill people's hours buckets up. And I've had people tell me, no, I just want to make sure they're not over allocated. But the first time Sally comes in and only has 30 hours for the sprint as opposed to the 80 hours, but the team is at their max velocity, that person's going to come to me and say, why hasn't that person got more hours in their bucket? And so we wind up overextending their velocity because we're tracking hours.
Wow, Bob, that's so good, and all of this, I just wish I had you to explain that to my management when we had that discussion not too long ago. But I'll tell you, this is good information, and thank you for making it so clear and breaking it down for us. I do want to wrap this up, so we're right a little bit over the top of the hour. I want to let everyone know our next event is July 19th. It's going to be what we're calling an acoustic set, which is going to be the first 50 people, and it's going to be in a meeting format. So it won't be a webinar format, so it'll be very interactive with Dottie Stewart. So the meeting, as this meeting closes, you'll get pushed to our website, coachingagiljourneys.com, and go ahead and register there if you think you're going to be able to make it and engage with us, because we're looking for those 50 seats. We're looking for them to be filled with people who can ask questions and help us drive some good content there. So I hope you all benefited from this today. I know I did. So on behalf of Jeff, Heidi, and the rest of our crew joining us here today, Jeff, let me say thank you. The rest of the questions that we have, we'll send them to you and see if you could answer them for our blog, and then we'll post those answers there along with the recording and your slides, if that's okay, Bob.
That's great.
Okay, putting that up there. Excellent. Okay, we'll have it up there in the next week or so. And again, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.